"It's okay, Daddy. We'll sleep in the car," the little girl whispered through tears. But when a billionaire's limo stopped in the rain, no one was ready for the secret that would turn their whole world upside down. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Marcus's hands trembled as he stuffed the last of their clothes into the fraying duffel bag. The zipper caught halfway, forcing him to push down hard on the overstuffed fabric. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the late afternoon chill seeping through their apartment's thin walls. "Time's up, Mr. Johnson," the landlord's voice cut through the heavy silence, making Marcus flinch. Mr. Peterson stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, tapping his foot against the worn linoleum floor. "I've got new tenants coming in tomorrow morning." Marcus nodded without looking up, his throat tight. "Yes, sir. Almost done." Across the nearly empty room, Alyssa sat cross-legged on the bare floor, holding her stuffed bear close to her chest. The bear, Mr. Snuggles, was missing an eye and had a patch of fur worn away on one arm, but it was her most precious possession. She watched her father with wide, solemn eyes that seemed too old for her young face. "Daddy?" Her small voice made his heart crack a little more. "Should I get my drawings from the kitchen?" Marcus paused his frantic packing, forcing a gentle smile. "No, baby. We packed those first, remember? They're safe in the box by the door." The box held everything that mattered most to Alyssa: her drawings, school certificates, and the only photo they had of her mother. Marcus had made sure to pack it carefully, even as his mind raced with worry about where they would go. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat loudly. "Mr. Johnson, I need those keys in the next 5 minutes." Marcus's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "Yes, sir, we're going." He'd always paid his rent on time until the factory closed 3 months ago. 15 years of work, gone overnight. He'd begged Mr. Peterson for just 2 more weeks, promised to pay double, but the landlord's face had remained stone cold. Thunder rumbled outside as Marcus zipped up the last bag. Dark clouds had been gathering all afternoon, threatening rain. He looked around the small apartment one last time, at the faded outline on the wall where Alyssa's growth chart had been, at the empty hooks where family photos once hung. "Come on, sweetheart," he said softly to Alyssa. "Time to go." Alyssa stood up slowly, clutching Mr. Snuggles with one hand and reaching for her father with the other. Her small fingers wrapped around his larger ones, squeezing tight. The simple gesture nearly broke him. Marcus shouldered the heavy duffel bag and picked up 2 boxes, stacking them carefully. "Can you carry your backpack, baby?" Alyssa nodded bravely, slipping on her purple backpack, a birthday gift from just 6 months ago, when things had been better. Marcus grabbed the last box, balancing it precariously on top of the others. Mr. Peterson stepped aside as they walked past him, his eyes fixed on his watch. Marcus handed him the keys without a word, his dignity the only thing he had left to hold on to. The first drops of rain began to fall as they loaded everything into their old Chevrolet. The car had seen better days, with rust spreading along the bottom edges and a passenger window that didn't roll down anymore. But it was paid for, their last possession of any real value. Marcus helped Alyssa into the back seat, making sure she was comfortable with her bear and backpack. She looked so small sitting there, her dark eyes watching him with complete trust, the kind of trust that made his chest ache because he wasn't sure he deserved it anymore. The rain picked up as Marcus drove through town, past the shuttered factory where he'd worked since Alyssa was a baby. Past the grocery store where the manager had told him they weren't hiring. Past the bank where his loan application had been denied. Each familiar building felt like another door closing. He drove until they reached the edge of town, where the streetlights grew sparse and the woods began. The rain was coming down in sheets now, drumming against the car roof and turning the world outside into a dark blur. Marcus pulled into an empty parking lot, cut the engine, and listened to the storm rage around them. Reality crashed down on him like the thunder overhead. They were homeless. He had failed his daughter, the one person he'd sworn to always protect. His savings were almost gone, and no one was hiring. The weight of it all pressed down on his chest until he could barely breathe. A small movement caught his attention. Alyssa had climbed into the front seat, her face illuminated briefly by a flash of lightning. She looked at him with such gentle concern that it made his heart break all over again. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered, reaching out to touch his arm. "We'll sleep in the car." The simple acceptance in her voice, the way she was trying to comfort him when it should be the other way around, it was too much. The tears he'd been holding back all day finally spilled over, running hot down his cheeks. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Through his breakdown, he felt Alyssa's small arms wrap around him as far as they could reach. She didn't say anything else, just held on tight as the storm raged and her father cried, while the rain continued to lash against the windshield of their temporary shelter. Rain drummed against the roof of the black Mercedes S-Class as it glided through the quiet streets of Pine Grove. Inside, Eleanor Whitfield sat perfectly straight in the back seat, her silver hair pulled into an immaculate bun, her steel gray suit as crisp as if she'd just walked out of a board meeting. She watched the raindrops chase each other down the window with practiced indifference. "Terrible weather tonight, Mrs. Whitfield." James, her chauffeur of 15 years, ventured from behind the wheel. His voice carried the slight tremor it always did when addressing her directly. Eleanor's response was a mere, barely audible over the purr of the engine. She'd spent the afternoon at yet another charity board meeting, listening to endless discussions about fundraising goals and community initiatives. All necessary, she knew, but thoroughly exhausting. The wipers swooshed back and forth, clearing sheets of water from the windshield. Through the glass, Eleanor observed the shabby storefronts and run-down buildings that lined this part of town. The factory closure had hit the area hard. She'd read the reports, seen the statistics, but had always viewed them with clinical detachment. Just numbers on a page. James slowed the car as they approached a red light. Eleanor's gaze drifted to an old sedan parked under a flickering streetlight. Something about it caught her attention, perhaps the way it sat slightly crooked, or how the paint had dulled to a tired gray. "Take Morrison Avenue, James," she instructed, though it wasn't their usual route. "The main road will be flooded by now." "Yes, ma'am." James guided the Mercedes onto the smaller street, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Eleanor found her eyes drawn back to that old sedan as they drove past. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could make out two figures inside. The larger one, a man, had his head bowed over the steering wheel, his shoulders shaking. Beside him, a small child reached out to pat his arm. "James." Eleanor's voice was sharp, surprising even herself. "Stop the car." "Ma'am?" James glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyebrows raised in confusion. "I said, stop the car." Her tone left no room for argument. The Mercedes eased to a halt, its tires sending up gentle sprays of water. Eleanor leaned forward, peering through the rain. The scene before her seemed to pierce through years of carefully constructed walls. The man was clearly crying, his whole body trembling with silent sobs. The little girl, she couldn't be more than 8 or 9, had unbuckled her seatbelt to lean closer to him, her small hand rubbing his shoulder in a gesture that seemed far too mature for her age. "Good heavens," Eleanor whispered, more to herself than to James. She watched as the child pressed her cheek against the man's arm, her face a picture of worried love. Something stirred in Eleanor's chest, an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The rain intensified, drumming against the Mercedes roof like impatient fingers. Eleanor sat frozen, her usual mask of indifference cracking. She thought of the empty guest house on her estate, of the countless spare rooms in her mansion that hadn't seen visitors in years. She thought of her own son, Thomas, who hadn't spoken to her in so long. "Mrs. Whitfield?" James's voice was uncertain. "Shall we continue home?" Eleanor's fingers tightened around her leather handbag. Everything in her carefully ordered world told her to say yes, to drive away and forget this scene. It wasn't her concern. It wasn't her problem. She had procedures for charitable giving, proper channels through which to help those in need. But she couldn't forget the child's gentle touch, couldn't ignore the raw humanity of the moment she'd witnessed. The man's grief was so palpable it seemed to reach across the space between their vehicles and wrap around her heart. "No," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, more firmly, "Pull over, James, right next to their car." "Ma'am?" James's surprise was evident in his tone. In 15 years, she had never asked him to stop for anyone. "You heard me correctly." Eleanor straightened her jacket, her movements precise, despite the tremor in her hands. "Pull over immediately." Eleanor stepped out of her car into the rain, her black umbrella snapping open with a soft whoosh. The steady patter of raindrops created a curtain of silver around her as she approached the old sedan, its windows fogged from the occupant's breath. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement, each step measured and deliberate. Through the driver's window, she could see the man hastily wiping his eyes, his broad shoulders straightened with dignity, though his hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. The little girl in the back seat stirred, her stuffed bear clutched tightly to her chest. Eleanor tapped gently on the window. After a moment's hesitation, it rolled down with a mechanical whir that spoke of better days. "Sir?" Her voice was softer than usual, surprising even herself. "I couldn't help but notice you seemed to be in some difficulty." Marcus looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, but holding a quiet strength. "We're fine, ma'am. Just taking a break before moving on." Alyssa leaned forward between the seats, her small face curious. "Hi," she said simply, giving Eleanor a tired smile that tugged at something long dormant in the older woman's chest. "Hello, dear." Eleanor found herself smiling back, an expression that felt foreign on her face. She turned back to Marcus. "I have a rather large estate just up in the hills. There's plenty of room, and on a night like this," she gestured at the sheets of rain, "well, no one should be sleeping in their car." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's very kind, but we couldn't impose." "Daddy," Alyssa whispered, though Eleanor could still hear her clearly. "I'm cold." The words seemed to pierce Marcus like physical blows. He closed his eyes briefly, and Eleanor could see the internal struggle playing across his features, pride warring with the desperate need to protect his daughter. "It's no imposition," Eleanor said firmly. "I have a guest house that's sitting empty. It would be a shame to let it go to waste when it could be of use." She paused, then added more gently, "Just for tonight at least, until you can make other arrangements." The rain continued its steady drumming, and a distant roll of thunder emphasized the growing storm. Marcus looked back at Alyssa, who had started shivering slightly despite her brave face. "James," Eleanor called to her chauffeur, who had been standing respectfully by the Mercedes. "Please help them with their belongings." James stepped forward, opening another large black umbrella. Marcus finally nodded, his shoulders dropping slightly in acceptance. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Just for tonight." They worked quickly in the rain, transferring the few bags from the sedan to the Mercedes' spacious trunk. Eleanor noticed how carefully Marcus handled one particular backpack, decorated with cartoon butterflies, obviously belonging to his daughter. Alyssa's eyes widened as she slid into the leather interior of the Mercedes, her small hand running wonderingly over the smooth surface. "It's like a princess car," she whispered to her father as he settled beside her. Eleanor caught Marcus's eye as she took her seat in the front passenger side. "I'm Eleanor Whitfield," she said, realizing she hadn't properly introduced herself. "Marcus Johnson," he replied, "and this is my daughter Alyssa. Pleased to meet you both." Eleanor turned to face forward as James started the engine. The interior lights dimmed, casting soft shadows that seemed to soften the awkwardness of the situation. As they pulled away from the curb, Eleanor watched in the side mirror as Marcus's old sedan grew smaller and smaller. She saw how his gaze lingered on it too. That car had probably been their last refuge, their final piece of security in a world that had turned harsh and unforgiving. The Mercedes wound its way up into the hills, its powerful engine purring quietly. Alyssa's face was pressed against the window, watching the streetlights blur through the rain. Marcus sat straight, his hands folded tightly in his lap, as if trying to take up as little space as possible in the luxurious vehicle. "It's not much further," Eleanor said, breaking the silence. "Just past this bend." As they rounded the curve, The gates of her estate came into view, ornate ironwork gleaming in the headlights. James pressed a button, and they swung open silently. The driveway curved through manicured grounds, and even in the darkness and rain, the scale of the property was impressive. Eleanor heard Alyssa's small gasp as the mansion came into view, its windows glowing warmly against the night. Marcus's breath caught too, though he tried to hide it. The Mercedes came to a smooth stop under the covered entrance, and James quickly came around to open the doors. "Welcome to Whitfield Estate," Eleanor said, watching as father and daughter stepped out, their expressions a mixture of awe and uncertainty. She gestured to James. "Please show Mr. Johnson and Alyssa to the guest house. Make sure they have everything they need for the night." Marcus turned to her, his face earnest in the soft lighting. "Mrs. Whitfield, I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need," she interrupted gently. "Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning." As James led them down the curved path toward the guest house, Eleanor watched Alyssa slip her small hand into her father's larger one. The child looked back over her shoulder and gave Eleanor another smile, tired but genuine, before they disappeared into the rainy darkness. Eleanor stood for a moment longer under the portico, listening to the rain. Something had shifted tonight. Some long-frozen part of herself had cracked ever so slightly. She wasn't sure if she welcomed the feeling or feared it. The Mercedes pulled away toward the garage, its red taillights reflecting off the wet pavement. Inside its trunk, Marcus and Alyssa's meager belongings sat alongside designer luggage, a stark reminder of the vast distance between their worlds. Yet somehow, on this rain-soaked night, that distance had been bridged by a simple act of kindness. The black sedan wound its way up the hillside, its headlights cutting through the rain to illuminate an ornate iron gate. As it swung open silently, Alyssa pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. The driveway seemed endless, lined with towering oak trees that swayed in the wind like silent guardians. Marcus sat stiffly in the leather seat, his worn duffel bag clutched in his lap. Every few seconds his eyes darted to the rearview mirror, checking on Alyssa. The car's interior smelled of expensive leather and something floral, so different from their old apartment's familiar sense of cooking oil and laundry detergent. Eleanor sat quietly beside him, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't spoken since they'd started driving, but her presence filled the car with an authority that made Marcus's shoulders tense. The mansion finally came into view, and Alyssa let out a small gasp. "Daddy, look," she whispered. "It's like a castle." The 3-story Georgian mansion loomed before them, its white columns gleaming despite the darkness. Warm light spilled from dozens of windows, and perfectly manicured shrubs lined the circular driveway. Marcus's throat tightened. Their entire apartment could have fit in just one wing of this place. The car came to a smooth stop under a covered entrance. Before Marcus could reach for the door handle, a butler in a crisp uniform appeared, opening the door and holding a large umbrella. "Welcome home, Miss Whitfield," the butler said, his voice carrying a hint of curiosity as he glanced at their guests. "I've prepared the blue guest suite, as requested." "Thank you, James," Eleanor replied, stepping out with practiced grace. "This is Mr. Johnson and his daughter Alyssa. They'll be staying with us tonight." Marcus climbed out awkwardly, then helped Alyssa, who was still clutching her bear. The stuffed animal looked even more worn against the backdrop of such grandeur. They followed Eleanor and James through massive double doors into an entrance hall that took Marcus's breath away. A crystal chandelier cast rainbow reflections across marble floors. Original paintings hung on walls covered in silk wallpaper. Their footsteps echoed in the vast space, making Marcus acutely aware of his worn boots, leaving tiny watermarks on the pristine floor. "This way, please," James said, leading them up a curved staircase. Marcus kept a protective hand on Alyssa's shoulder as they climbed, though his daughter seemed more excited than intimidated. The blue guest suite was larger than their entire old apartment. 2 connected rooms featured high ceilings with ornate moldings, and huge windows looked out over what Marcus assumed were beautiful gardens, though they were hidden by darkness and rain. A king-sized bed dominated one room, while a smaller bedroom held 2 twin beds. I thought Alyssa might like her own space, Eleanor said, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. But of course, she can stay with you if she prefers. Thank you, Marcus managed, his voice rough with emotion he struggled to contain. This is very generous. James moved efficiently around the rooms, turning on lamps that cast a warm glow. Fresh towels are in the bathroom, he explained, indicating a door Marcus hadn't noticed. There are spare toiletries in the cabinets, and extra blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. Will you be requiring anything else this evening? Marcus shook his head, not trusting himself to speak again. Alyssa, however, had no such hesitation. This is the prettiest room I've ever seen, she declared, running her hand over the silk bedspread. Look, Daddy, the pillows match my bear. Indeed, the room's blue and white color scheme did complement her well-loved teddy bear. Eleanor's lips curved in what might have been a smile, though it disappeared so quickly Marcus wasn't sure he'd seen it. Well then, we'll leave you to settle in, Eleanor said. James will bring up some tea and sandwiches shortly. Please let him know if you need anything else. She paused at the door. Good night. After they left, Marcus sank into a plush armchair by the window, watching the rain stream down the glass. Behind him, Alyssa was exploring every corner of the rooms, opening drawers and peering into the bathroom with delighted exclamations. Daddy, the bathtub has feet, and look at all these fancy soaps. Don't touch anything you don't need to, baby, Marcus called out automatically, though he knew Alyssa was naturally careful with others' belongings. James returned with a silver tray bearing tea, milk, sugar, and a plate of delicate sandwiches. He set it on a small table near Marcus. Miss Alyssa, would you like some hot chocolate? He asked, producing a covered mug that made Alyssa's eyes light up. After James departed again, Marcus insisted Alyssa take a warm bath before eating. She emerged wearing her last clean nightgown, her hair wrapped in a thick white towel. They sat together on the window seat, sharing the sandwiches and drinking their respective beverages. Do you think there are secret passages? Alyssa whispered, as if someone might be listening. In movies, big houses like this always have secret passages. Marcus managed a small laugh. I don't know, sweetheart, but we're not going exploring to find out. This isn't our home, we're just guests for tonight. Alyssa's face fell slightly, but she nodded. I know, Daddy. She yawned, the events of the day finally catching up with her. But it's nice to be warm again. The simple statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. He helped Alyssa into the smaller bed, tucking the soft blankets around her and her bear. She was asleep almost instantly, her face peaceful for the first time in days. Marcus returned to his seat by the window, watching the rain while his tea grew cold. The enormity of their situation weighed on him, the shame of accepting charity, the relief of having his daughter in a safe place, the uncertainty of tomorrow. He clasped his hands together, bowing his head. Lord, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rain. Thank you for sending Miss Whitfield tonight. Thank you for this shelter, for these beds, for giving Alyssa a warm place to sleep. He paused, swallowing hard. I promise I'll find a way to repay this kindness. Just help me be strong enough to take care of my baby girl. Amen. He remained by the window, watching over his sleeping daughter, his mind already working on how to restore their independence without seeming ungrateful for this unexpected blessing. Morning sunlight streamed through the guest room's bay windows, casting warm patterns across the plush carpet. Marcus woke early, his body still programmed for his factory shift schedule. He found Alyssa already awake, sitting cross-legged on the window seat, drawing in her little notebook with the stubby pencil she always carried. Morning, baby girl, Marcus said softly, his heart warming at how peaceful she looked. Alyssa turned, her smile bright. Daddy, look, you can see the whole town from up here. She pointed down the hillside where the small southern town sprawled beneath them, morning mist still clinging to its streets. A gentle knock at the door made them both turn. Eleanor stood in the doorway, already dressed in a crisp blue blouse and tailored slacks. I thought we might go into town for some groceries, she said. The kitchen could use restocking, and I'm sure you both need a few things. Marcus straightened, immediately self-conscious in his wrinkled shirt. Ma'am, That's not necessary. Please. Eleanor held up a hand, her expression softening just slightly. I insist. And it's Eleanor, not ma'am. Alyssa bounced on her toes. Can I wear my special hair ribbons, Daddy? 20 minutes later, they climbed into Eleanor's car. Marcus noticed how the chauffeur's eyes widened slightly in the rearview mirror. Clearly, Eleanor didn't usually take guests on morning errands. The drive into town was quiet, broken only by Alyssa's excited observations about everything she saw. Main Street looked different in the morning light. The locally owned shops were opening their doors, sidewalks still damp from the night's rain. The car pulled up in front of Jensen's Market, the largest grocery store in town. As they walked in, the fluorescent lights seemed to spotlight them. Marcus felt every eye turn their way. Eleanor Whitfield rarely came to town herself, and never with company, especially not company that looked like them. Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield, the store manager called out, hurrying over. His smile faltered slightly when he glanced at Marcus and Alyssa. Can I help you find anything today? We'll manage, thank you, Eleanor replied coolly, reaching for a shopping cart. They moved through the aisles, Eleanor selecting items with practiced efficiency while Alyssa skipped alongside her, chattering about her favorite cereals. Marcus followed behind, increasingly aware of the whispers that seemed to trail them. Living up at Whitfield Manor, that factory worker who got laid off probably just feels sorry for them. At the produce section, two middle-aged women in tennis outfits barely attempted to lower their voices. It's so charitable of Eleanor, taking in strays like that. Well, you know how these things go. She'll parade them around for a while, make herself feel good, then send them on their way. Marcus's jaw clenched tight, his hands forming fists at his sides. He glanced quickly at Alyssa, relieved to see she was absorbed in helping Eleanor pick out apples, seemingly oblivious to the cruel undertones swirling around them. Eleanor's cart filled steadily, bread, milk, fresh vegetables, and several items Marcus recognized as Alyssa's excited pointing from earlier. His chest tightened. He hadn't been able to afford brand-name cereals or fresh fruit for months. Near the checkout, they passed Mrs. Thompson, who taught at Alyssa's old school. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Oh, Alyssa dear," she exclaimed, then lowered her voice to what she probably thought was a discreet volume. "I heard about your situation. Such a blessing that Mrs. Whitfield is helping you out." Marcus felt the words like physical blows. Each sympathetic glance, each whispered comment, reinforced what he already feared, that everyone saw them as nothing more than Eleanor's latest charity project. At the checkout, Eleanor smoothly handed over her credit card before Marcus could object. The cashier's eyes darted between them, curiosity barely concealed behind her professional smile. As they waited for the bags to be loaded, Marcus overheard two men near the store entrance. "Whitfield's really putting on a show with this one," one muttered to the other. "Guess she needed some good publicity after that business with her son." Marcus's fingers dug into his palms. He wanted to turn around, to defend his dignity, to tell them they knew nothing about him or his daughter. But Alyssa was right there, happily helping Eleanor organize the shopping bags, and he couldn't let her see his anger or hurt. Instead, he took a deep breath and forced his hands to relax. He'd endured worse than whispers and stares. For Alyssa's sake, he would endure this too. The drive back to the manor was quieter than the journey down. Even Alyssa seemed to sense the change in mood, her earlier excitement tempered. Marcus stared out the window, his jaw still tight, while Eleanor sat perfectly straight, her expression unreadable. Only when they passed through the iron gates did Marcus feel some of the tension leave his shoulders. But the whispers followed him in his mind, a constant reminder that no matter how generous Eleanor's offer was to the town, they would always be nothing more than her charity case, her way of proving her own goodness to the world. The evening settled over Eleanor's estate like a heavy blanket. Shadows lengthened across the manicured lawn as crickets began their nightly chorus. Inside the mansion's grand kitchen, Alyssa sat at the marble counter, carefully coloring while Marcus insisted on helping prepare dinner, his way of showing gratitude for their temporary shelter. Eleanor watched with quiet amazement as Marcus moved confidently around her kitchen, The sleeves of his worn flannel shirt rolled up as he chopped vegetables for a simple stew. His movements were precise and careful, each action deliberate and thoughtful. "My mama taught me to cook when I was just a boy," Marcus explained, noticing Eleanor's interest. "Said every man should know how to feed his family." "It smells wonderful," Eleanor said, allowing herself a small smile. She'd forgotten what it was like to have life and warmth in her kitchen. For too long it had been just her and the occasional visit from her housekeeper. The peaceful moment shattered at the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. Eleanor's face went pale as she recognized the distinctive purr of her son's luxury car. "Thomas," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "He wasn't supposed to." The front door slammed open with such force that Alyssa jumped, her crayons skittering across the paper. Heavy footsteps echoed through the foyer. "Mother?" Thomas's voice boomed. "What's this about you taking in strays? The whole town is talking." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expensive suit, a stark contrast to Marcus's worn clothes. Thomas froze, his face twisting from surprise to disgust as his gaze swept over Marcus and Alyssa. "What is this?" Thomas demanded, his voice ice cold. "What are these people doing in our home?" Eleanor stepped forward, her spine straightening. "Thomas, this is Marcus Johnson and his daughter Alyssa. They're my guests." "Guests?" Thomas let out a harsh laugh. "Since when do you take in random people off the street? Have you lost your mind?" Marcus quietly set down his knife, wiping his hands on a nearby towel. "Mr. Whitfield, I apologize if our presence—" "Don't!" Thomas cut him off sharply. "Don't speak to me. Mother, we need to talk. Privately. Now." Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Marcus, would you mind watching the stew?" "Alyssa, sweetheart, keep working on your beautiful drawing." As Eleanor followed Thomas into her study, Marcus could hear their voices rising immediately. He moved to stand near Alyssa, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, baby," he murmured, but his heart was pounding. He could hear snippets of the argument through the walls. "Have you completely lost your senses?" Thomas's voice carried clearly. "Do you have any idea what this looks like?" "I don't care what it looks like," Eleanor shot back. "They needed help." "They needed help?" Thomas's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Mother, there are shelters for people like that. Organizations. You don't bring them into your home." "People like that?" Eleanor's voice turned sharp. "What exactly do you mean by that, Thomas?" In the kitchen, Marcus fought to keep his expression neutral for Alyssa's sake, but each word felt like a physical blow. He'd faced this kind of prejudice before, but it never stopped hurting. The argument grew louder, more heated. Thomas's voice reached a thundering pitch. "This is our family home. Father would be appalled. Don't you dare bring your father into this." Eleanor's voice cracked with emotion. "Your father believed in helping people. He believed in dignity and compassion. He believed in protecting our family name," Thomas roared, "which you're dragging through the mud. I've already gotten calls from board members, from friends." Alyssa looked up at Marcus, her eyes wide with worry. "Daddy, should we leave?" Marcus swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "No, baby. Just keep coloring. Everything's fine." The study door burst open, and Thomas stormed back into the kitchen, Eleanor right behind him. His face was red with anger, and he pointed an accusing finger at Marcus. "This ends now," Thomas declared. "I won't stand by and watch you destroy everything we've built. Mother, either they leave, or I'll have no choice but to take action." Eleanor's voice was steel. "What kind of action?" "I'll call an emergency board meeting. Question your judgment publicly. Maybe it's time we discussed your capacity to manage your affairs." Thomas's threat hung in the air like poison. Marcus stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Mrs. Whitfield, we don't want to cause any trouble. We can—" "No," Eleanor cut him off, her voice trembling but determined. "You will not threaten me in my own home, Thomas. Not over an act of basic human kindness." Thomas's laugh was cruel. "Basic human kindness? Wake up, Mother. Look around you. This isn't some Hallmark movie where you save the poor family and everyone lives happily ever after. This is real life, and actions have consequences. The tension in the room was unbearable. Marcus could feel it pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. He'd seen that look before. In landlords who wouldn't rent to him, in employers who suddenly had no positions available, in store owners who followed him around their shops. "You have until tomorrow," Thomas said, his voice cold and final. "Either they're gone, or I start making calls. Your choice, Mother." He turned and strode out, his footsteps echoing through the mansion. The sound of his car starting and peeling out of the driveway broke the heavy silence that followed. Eleanor stood trembling, one hand pressed against the counter for support. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." Marcus looked down at Alyssa, who had stopped coloring and sat perfectly still, her small shoulders tense. He'd promised himself long ago that his daughter would never have to see him bow his head to anyone's prejudice, but now he felt the familiar weight of reality crushing his hopes once again. The stew continued to simmer on the stove, filling the kitchen with its homey aroma, but the comfort it had brought earlier was gone. In its place was only the suffocating knowledge that once again, through no fault of their own, Marcus and Alyssa's world was about to be upended. The morning sun had barely risen when Marcus was already up, standing at the window of the guest room. The vast grounds of Eleanor's estate stretched before him, dew glistening on the grass like scattered diamonds. His work boots, though worn, were polished, a habit his father had instilled in him years ago. "A man's shoes tell his story," he'd always said. Alyssa still slept soundly in the plush bed, her stuffed bear tucked under one arm. Marcus watched her for a moment, his heart swelling with love and determination. He couldn't let her see him as anything less than the provider he'd always been. In the kitchen, he found Eleanor already awake, sipping her morning coffee while reading the newspaper. She looked up, surprised to see him dressed for work so early. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, his voice firm but respectful, "I noticed some things that need attention around the property. With your permission, I'd like to help out." Eleanor set down her coffee cup. "Marcus, that's not necessary. You're my guest." "Ma'am, my daddy taught me that a man pays his way." His shoulders straightened. "I saw those broken shutters on the east wing, and your lawn needs attention. I'm good with my hands. Used to do maintenance work before the factory." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, recognizing the quiet dignity in his stance. "Very well," she finally said. "The gardening supplies are in the shed behind the garage, but please, don't overwork yourself." Marcus nodded and headed outside. The morning air was crisp, carrying the sweet scent of magnolias from Eleanor's prized trees. In the shed, he found an old push mower, its blade slightly dull but serviceable. He spent 20 minutes sharpening it properly before starting on the vast lawn. Row by row, he pushed the mower across the grass, creating perfect lines that would have made any groundskeeper proud. Sweat soon darkened his t-shirt, but he didn't stop. Each pass of the mower felt like reclaiming a piece of his self-respect. Mid-morning, Alyssa came bouncing out carrying a glass of water. "Daddy, Mrs. Eleanor asked me to bring you this." Marcus paused, wiping his brow with his forearm. "Thank you, baby girl." He took a long drink, watching as Alyssa surveyed his work with serious eyes. "The grass looks like stripes now," she observed, "like at the baseball field." "That's right." He ruffled her hair. "Your daddy knows how to make things look proper." After finishing the lawn, Marcus turned his attention to the shutters. The ancient wooden slats were weathered and loose, some hanging at awkward angles. He found tools in the shed and carefully removed each shutter, laying them out on the driveway to repair. Eleanor watched from her study window as Marcus meticulously stripped, sanded, and repainted each shutter. His movements were precise and careful, taking pride in every detail. She noticed how he would occasionally glance at Alyssa, who had set up her coloring books nearby, as if drawing strength from her presence. By early afternoon, Marcus had moved on to other tasks. He fixed a loose railing on the back steps, cleared debris from the gutters, and repaired a broken fence post. Each job was done with the same careful attention to detail. The sun climbed high, then began its slow descent. Marcus kept working, stopping only when Alyssa brought him sandwiches at lunch. His hands were rough from work, but his spirit felt lighter with each task completed. As evening approached, Eleanor stood on her balcony, observing the transformation of her grounds. The lawn stretched out in perfect stripes, the shutters hung straight and proud, and various small repairs she hadn't even noticed needed doing were complete. But it was Marcus himself who drew her attention, the way he carried himself now with quiet confidence, checking each job one final time before putting the tools away. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the newly manicured lawn. Eleanor watched as Marcus finally gathered his tools, his daughter skipping beside him as they headed toward the shed. Despite the exhaustion evident in his movements, his head was held high. She found herself deeply moved by his unwavering pride and determination to maintain his dignity, even in the face of hardship. There was something in his manner that reminded her of her late husband, the same quiet strength, the same insistence on earning his way. As the last rays of sunlight gilded the estate in golden light, Eleanor remained on her balcony, silently witnessing a man who refused to be defined by his circumstances. The garden burst with color. Under the late morning Sunday, Eleanor knelt beside her prized rose bushes, secateurs in hand, carefully trimming away dead leaves. Her usual perfectly pressed clothes had been swapped for casual gardening attire, though even these looked expensive. She worked with precise movements, each snip calculated and careful. Alyssa appeared at the garden's entrance, drawn by the vibrant flowers. She stood hesitantly at first, her small hands clutching the sides of her yellow sundress, one of the few nice things Marcus had managed to keep for her. Eleanor noticed the girl's presence, but continued working, allowing Alyssa to approach at her own pace. "Those are pretty," Alyssa said softly, pointing to a bush heavy with deep red blooms. Eleanor looked up, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. "These are called Mr. Lincoln roses. They're quite special. They have the strongest perfume of any rose I grow." Alyssa took a few steps closer, her natural curiosity overtaking her shyness. "Can I smell them?" "Of course." Eleanor gestured her forward. "Just be careful of the thorns." Alyssa leaned in carefully, inhaling deeply. Her eyes widened with delight. "They smell like fancy perfume, but better. My husband Charles used to say the same thing." Eleanor's voice softened at the memory. "He helped me plant this garden many years ago." "Where is he now?" Alyssa asked, then quickly added, "I'm sorry. Daddy says sometimes we shouldn't ask grown-ups personal questions." Eleanor surprised herself by chuckling. "It's all right, dear. Charles passed away 5 years ago, but he lives on in this garden. Every spring, when these roses bloom, I feel him here with me." Alyssa nodded with understanding beyond her years. "Sometimes I imagine my mommy watching over me too, even though I never met her." Eleanor's hand stilled on the rose bush. She looked at the little girl with new eyes, seeing past the worn clothes to the old soul within. "Would you like to help me tend the garden? I could teach you about the different flowers." Alyssa's face lit up. "Really? I won't mess anything up? Gardens are more forgiving than people think. Here." Eleanor handed Alyssa a small watering can. "These petunias are thirsty. Just sprinkle the water gently, like rain." As Alyssa carefully watered the flowers, she chatted freely about her dreams of becoming an artist someday. Eleanor found herself drawn into the conversation, answering questions about the colors in nature and how they might look in paintings. "Did you always want to live in a big house with a garden?" Alyssa asked, setting down the empty watering can. Eleanor paused, considering. "Actually, when I was your age, I wanted to be a ballet dancer." "You?" Alyssa giggled, then quickly covered her mouth. The sound of the child's laughter broke something loose in Eleanor. She found herself laughing too, a real laugh, not the polite society chuckle she'd trained herself to use. "Yes, me. I took lessons and everything. I was terrible, mind you. 2 left feet." They spent the next hour working side by side, Eleanor showing Alyssa how to deadhead spent blooms and identify different plants. The girl's genuine enthusiasm was infectious, and Eleanor found herself sharing stories she hadn't thought about in years. "Look, Alyssa pointed excitedly at a butterfly that had landed on a nearby zinnia. It's dancing like a ballet dancer. Eleanor laughed again, the sound becoming easier each time. So it is, much more graceful than I ever was. As the sun climbed higher, Eleanor noticed Alyssa's stomach growling. I think it's time for lunch. Would you like to help me make sandwiches? Can we eat them out here, like a picnic? I don't see why not. Eleanor couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten anywhere but her formal dining room. Let's wash up and raid the kitchen. They made simple peanut butter and jelly sandwiches together, Eleanor letting Alyssa spread the ingredients herself, even though it made a mess. They carried their lunch out to a shady spot beneath an old oak tree, spreading a blanket on the grass. As they ate, Alyssa asked, Miss Eleanor, do you get lonely in this big house all by yourself? The question caught Eleanor off guard. She looked at the child's earnest face and found herself answering honestly. Yes, sometimes I do. Well, you don't have to be lonely anymore. You have me and Daddy now. Eleanor felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She busied herself with folding her napkin, trying to maintain her composure. Later that evening, after Eleanor had retired to her study, Alyssa sat on her temporary bed while Marcus brushed her hair for the night. The girl's eyes were heavy with sleep, but she was full of stories about her day in the garden. And Miss Eleanor showed me how to water the flowers just right, and we saw a butterfly, and she used to take ballet lessons. Alyssa's words tumbled out in excitement. I really like her, Daddy. She seems sad sometimes, but she laughed today. Can we stay here forever? Marcus's hands stilled for a moment as he braided her hair. His heart ached at the hope in his daughter's voice. He forced his tone to stay light as he resumed braiding. That's not really up to us, baby girl. But she likes us too, I can tell. Alyssa yawned, snuggling down into her pillow. And her garden needs us. She said I have a natural touch with the flowers. Marcus tucked the blanket around her, hiding the bittersweet smile that crossed his face. He knew better than to believe in forever. Life had taught him that lesson too many times. But he couldn't bear to crush his daughter's joy, not when she looked so peaceful, so at home. Time for sleep now, he said softly, kissing her forehead. Sweet dreams, baby girl. Sweet dreams, Daddy, Alyssa murmured, already drifting off. Tomorrow Miss Eleanor's going to show me how to plant seeds. Marcus sat beside her bed for a long moment, watching her peaceful face in the soft lamplight, knowing that this moment of happiness, like so many others, couldn't last forever. Marcus adjusted his tie one last time before pushing open the heavy glass door of Wilson's warehouse and distribution. The familiar scent of cardboard and forklift exhaust brought back memories of his years at the factory. He'd worn his best shirt pressed crisp the night before and polished his old dress shoes until they gleamed. The reception area was cool and quiet, with only the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. A young woman at the desk looked up, her smile professional but distant. I have an interview with Mr. Peterson at 10, Marcus said, keeping his voice steady and confident. She checked her computer. Marcus Johnson? Yes, ma'am. Please have a seat. He'll be with you shortly. Marcus settled into one of the hard plastic chairs, his application folder balanced on his knee. Through the windows, he could see workers moving pallets and loading trucks. The sight made his hands itch to be useful again. He'd always taken pride in honest work. After 15 minutes, a door opened. Mr. Johnson? Robert Peterson was shorter than Marcus had expected, with thinning gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. His handshake was firm. Come on back to my office, Peterson said, gesturing down a narrow hallway lined with safety posters. The office was small but tidy, with certificates on the walls and a family photo on the desk. Peterson settled behind his desk and picked up Marcus's application. So, I see you have extensive experience in warehouse operations, Peterson began, nodding appreciatively. 5 years at Carlton Manufacturing? Yes, sir. Started on the floor and worked my way up to shift supervisor. Impressive, and your references are solid. Peterson flipped through the papers. We're looking for someone reliable, someone who can handle responsibility. This position includes benefits after 90 days. Marcus's heart lifted. The conversation flowed easily as they discussed safety protocols, inventory systems, and team management. Peterson seemed genuinely interested in Marcus's ideas for improving efficiency. "Well, Mr. Johnson, I have to say I'm impressed with your qualifications." Peterson smiled, but then his eyes caught something on the application. His expression shifted subtly. "I see your current address is Whitfield Estate?" Marcus's stomach tightened. "Yes, sir. It's a temporary arrangement while I—" "Eleanor Whitfield's place?" Peterson's tone had cooled noticeably. "That's correct. Mrs. Whitfield has been kind enough to—" "I see." Peterson shuffled the papers, no longer meeting Marcus's eyes. "Well, Mr. Johnson, we actually have several other candidates to interview. The position isn't as straightforward as we initially thought." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Marcus recognized the change immediately. He'd seen it too many times before. The sudden shift from respect to dismissal, the way Peterson's eyes now slid past him as if he'd become invisible. "I understand the position requires experience," Marcus said carefully, fighting to keep his voice level. "I can assure you, we'll be in touch if anything suitable opens up." Peterson cut in, standing abruptly. "Thank you for coming in." The dismissal was clear as glass. Marcus rose slowly, his legs feeling heavy. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Peterson." The walk back through the warehouse seemed longer now. Workers glanced at him, then away. Outside, the sun felt too bright, almost mocking. Marcus loosened his tie, which now felt like it was choking him. He walked the 3 miles back to the estate, his dress shoes pinching with every step. The humiliation burned in his chest. He'd seen the moment Peterson made his assumptions, probably thought Marcus was trying to use Eleanor's influence, or worse, was just another charity case who couldn't be trusted with real responsibility. As he approached the estate's wrought iron gates, he spotted Alyssa waiting for him. She sat on the low stone wall, swinging her legs, her face lighting up as she saw him. The sight of her innocent hope made his throat tight. "Daddy!" She jumped down, running to meet him. "Did you get the job?" Marcus forced his features into a smile, though it felt like wearing a mask. He reached out to ruffle her hair, trying to keep his voice light. "Not this time, baby girl." Eleanor smoothed her gray silk blazer as she walked into the mahogany-paneled boardroom of the Whitfield Foundation. The familiar scent of coffee and leather chairs greeted her, along with the carefully neutral expressions of the 12 board members seated around the massive table. She'd sat through hundreds of these meetings over the years, but something felt different today. The air crackled with unspoken tension. "Good morning," Eleanor said, taking her usual seat at the head of the table. Her voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd spent decades in positions of power. "Shall we begin?" Barbara Winston, a longtime board member with perfectly coiffed silver hair, cleared her throat. "Before we discuss the quarterly reports, Eleanor, some of us have concerns we'd like to address." Eleanor's spine stiffened, but her face remained composed. "Go on." "Well," Barbara glanced at the other board members, seeking silent support. "There are rumors circulating about your current living arrangement, housing a homeless family at your estate." "The Johnsons," Eleanor said firmly. "Marcus and his daughter Alyssa. Yes, they're staying with me temporarily." William Peters, a ruddy-faced banker who'd served on the board for 15 years, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. "Eleanor, we all admire your charitable spirit, but this seems rather excessive. There are proper channels for this sort of thing." "Proper channels?" Eleanor's voice took on an edge. "You mean like our underfunded homeless shelter that's already at triple capacity?" "That's not what William meant," Patricia Coleman cut in, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured. "We're worried about appearances. The Whitfield name carries weight in this community. Your father built this foundation on principles of careful, strategic giving." Eleanor felt heat rising in her chest. "My father built this foundation to help people in need. That's exactly what I'm doing." A murmur rippled through the room. Barbara leaned forward, her voice dropping to a concerned whisper. "Eleanor, dear, people are talking. They're saying you're throwing away your legacy on this project." "Project?" Eleanor's hands clenched beneath the table. Marcus Johnson is a hard-working father who lost his job due to circumstances beyond his control. His daughter is a bright, beautiful child who deserves a safe place to sleep. They're not a project. Nevertheless, William interjected, housing them personally seems inappropriate. What about your reputation? The foundation's reputation? Eleanor looked around the table, really seeing her fellow board members for the first time. These people had been her peers for years, sharing expensive lunches and charity galas. Now their familiar faces seemed like masks, hiding something ugly underneath. I've watched that little girl draw pictures of flowers in my garden, Eleanor said quietly. I've seen her father work from sunrise to sunset, fixing things around my estate that I didn't even know needed repair. They have names, they have dignity, they have dreams. Nobody's questioning their worth, Patricia said quickly. You just think they don't belong in my home, Eleanor finished. That they should be helped from a safe distance, with proper paperwork and committees and annual reports. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor, Barbara tried again, her tone patronizing. We're only thinking of your best interests. What would Thomas say about all this? The mention of her son's name was like a physical blow, but Eleanor didn't flinch. Thomas has already made his feelings quite clear, and like him, you all seem to have forgotten what this foundation was meant to be. She stood up, gathering her papers with steady hands. When I took over this foundation after my husband died, I promised to continue his work of making real differences in people's lives. Not just writing checks and attending galas, but actually seeing the humanity in those we claim to help. But your position in society? William started. My position in society is precisely why I should be doing this. Eleanor cut him off. If we, with all our privileges and resources, won't open our doors to those in need, who will? The board members exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, others disapproving. Eleanor could feel their judgment like a physical weight, but something stronger was rising within her, a certainty she hadn't felt in years. I've spent too many years hiding behind these walls, she continued, gesturing to the expensive paneling around them, throwing money at problems from a safe distance. Meeting Marcus and Alyssa has reminded me what real courage looks like. Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line. If you continue down this path, there could be consequences. The board may need to reconsider certain arrangements. The threat hung in the air, clear as crystal. Eleanor picked up her designer handbag, her movements deliberate and calm despite the trembling she felt inside. Then reconsider them, she said quietly. But understand this. I will not abandon that family just because their presence makes some people uncomfortable. If that costs me my position here, so be it. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. At the threshold, she paused and turned back to face the stunned board members. The next time you pray at your churches or synagogues, she said softly, ask yourselves what your faith really means. Is it just words, or are you willing to actually live it? Eleanor stepped out of the boardroom, closing the door behind her with a gentle click. In the empty hallway, she finally allowed herself to lean against the wall, her hands shaking as she fumbled in her bag for her car keys. The magnitude of what had just happened hit her full force. She had potentially alienated her entire social circle, challenged the board that controlled much of her charitable work, and publicly defended a family that many in her world saw as beneath them. Yet beneath the trembling and uncertainty, she felt something else. A steady, warm certainty that she had done the right thing. She thought of Alyssa's bright smile when she showed Eleanor her latest drawing of Marcus's quiet dignity as he worked in her garden. They weren't a cause or a project. They were people who had brought more life and meaning to her empty mansion than all her years of careful philanthropy. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor straightened her shoulders and walked toward the elevator. Let them whisper, let them judge. She had finally found something worth fighting for, and she wasn't about to back down now. The morning sun painted Eleanor's vast estate in gentle golden hues. Dew still clung to the grass as Eleanor led Marcus and Alyssa down a winding path through her property. She walked with purpose, though her heart fluttered with nervous excitement. "Where are we going?" Alyssa asked, skipping alongside them. Her pink sneakers left small imprints in the dewy grass. "You'll see," Eleanor replied with a mysterious smile. She glanced at Marcus, who walked quietly beside them, his hands in his pockets. The past few weeks had left their mark on him. New worry lines creased his forehead, though his posture remained proud and dignified. They followed the path past Eleanor's prized rose garden, where Alyssa had spent countless hours helping Eleanor tend to the flowers. The little girl pointed excitedly at a yellow bloom she'd helped plant. "Look, Daddy, our rose is getting so big." Marcus smiled, reaching down to ruffle her hair. "Sure is, baby girl." As they rounded a gentle curve in the path, a structure came into view through the morning mist. It was a charming cottage-style guest house, its fresh white paint gleaming in the early light. Window boxes overflowed with bright red geraniums, and a neat stone path led to a bright blue front door. Marcus stopped in his tracks. "I didn't know there was another house back here." "It's been empty for years," Eleanor explained, fiddling with a ring of keys in her hands. "It needed quite a bit of work, but the contractors finished everything last week." Alyssa ran ahead to peer through one of the windows, standing on her tiptoes. "It's so pretty. Look at the curtains, Daddy." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she selected a key from the ring. "I had it completely renovated. New plumbing, new electrical, new everything really." She paused, gathering her courage. I thought it might make a perfect home for you both." Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What?" "The house," Eleanor said softly. "It's yours if you want it. No strings attached." She held out the keys, watching emotions play across Marcus's face: shock, confusion, gratitude, and something that looked like fear. "Miss Whitfield," he started, his voice rough. "We can't possibly—" "You can," she interrupted gently. "And you should. Would you like to see inside?" Before Marcus could protest further, Alyssa grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the door. "Please, Daddy? Can we look?" Eleanor unlocked the door and stepped back, allowing them to enter first. The morning light streamed through large windows, illuminating the open-concept living area. The walls were painted in warm, creamy tones, and comfortable furniture in soft blues and greens invited relaxation. A small fireplace occupied one corner, with built-in bookshelves on either side. Alyssa immediately ran to explore, her excited voice carrying through the house. "Daddy, there's a window seat, and look at this kitchen." Marcus stood in the center of the living room, taking it all in. His hands opened and closed at his sides, as if he didn't know what to do with them. Eleanor moved to stand beside him. "There are 2 bedrooms upstairs. I had the smaller one painted purple." Alyssa mentioned it was her favorite color. "This is too much," Marcus whispered, but his eyes continued to drink in every detail. "It's not," Eleanor said firmly. "This house has been sitting empty for years, serving no purpose. Now it can be a home again." Alyssa's footsteps thundered down the stairs. "Daddy, there's a desk in my room, and string lights on the ceiling that look like stars." She rushed back to them, her face glowing with joy. Then she noticed her father's expression and grew quiet, reaching for his hand. "Don't you like it, Daddy?" Marcus knelt down to her level, his voice thick with emotion. "Of course I like it, baby. It's beautiful. But nothing," Eleanor cut in gently. "Marcus, you've worked so hard these past weeks. I've seen your dedication, your integrity. You deserve a fresh start, both of you." She moved to the kitchen, running her hand along the smooth countertop. "Besides, I need someone to look after the estate grounds properly. The position comes with housing, this housing, to be specific. If you're interested in the job." Marcus stood slowly, still holding Alyssa's hand. "A job? Full-time. Benefits. Fair pay." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "You've already proved you're more than qualified." "Miss Whitfield." Marcus's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Eleanor, I don't know what to say." "Say yes, Daddy." Alyssa tugged at his hand. "Please, we can stay here with Miss Eleanor, and I can help with the roses, and—" She broke off as Marcus pulled her into a tight hug. Over her head, he looked at Eleanor, tears gathering in his eyes. Thank you, he managed. Thank you. Alyssa wiggled free from her father's embrace and ran to throw her arms around Eleanor's waist. Her voice was muffled against Eleanor's dress as she exclaimed, "Daddy, we have a real home again." The simple words struck them all like a physical force. Marcus pressed a hand to his mouth, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. Eleanor felt her own eyes growing wet as she hugged Alyssa back. The morning sunlight continued to pour through the windows, warming the hardwood floors. Outside, birds sang in the garden, and a gentle breeze stirred the geraniums in their window boxes. Inside, 3 people stood in their own private miracle, bound together by something stronger than charity, something that felt remarkably like family. The peaceful afternoon shattered like glass when Thomas's black Mercedes screeched to a halt in front of Eleanor's mansion. He burst through the front doors, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face twisted with rage. Legal papers fluttered in his clenched fist as he stormed into the grand foyer. "Mother," his voice echoed through the high-ceilinged hallway. "Where are you?" Eleanor emerged from her study, her shoulders squared despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Thomas, there's no need to shout." Marcus was in the kitchen helping Alyssa with her homework when they heard the commotion. He instinctively placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Stay here, baby girl," he whispered, but Alyssa's wide eyes were already fixed on the doorway. Thomas thrust the papers at Eleanor. "You've left me no choice. I've spoken with our lawyers. If you don't end this ridiculous charity project right now, I'm having you declared mentally unfit to manage your affairs." Eleanor's face paled as she scanned the documents. Her reading glasses slipped slightly down her nose, and her hands shook more visibly now. "You can't be serious," she said quietly. "Oh, I'm dead serious." Thomas's voice dripped with venom. "What else am I supposed to think? My mother, who barely spoke to me for years, suddenly takes in complete strangers, living in our family's guest house?" Marcus stepped into the foyer, his work boots quiet against the marble floor. "Mr. Whitfield, this isn't necessary. We can talk about this like adults." Thomas whirled around, his expensive leather shoes squeaking. "You don't get to speak to me. You're nothing but an opportunist who's taking advantage of my mother's temporary confusion." "Thomas!" Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. "That's enough." But Thomas was on a roll now, pacing the foyer like a caged animal. "Do you know what people are saying in town? That the great Eleanor Whitfield has lost her mind. That she's being manipulated by some." He cast a disgusted look at Marcus. "Some charity case who couldn't even keep a roof over his kid's head." Marcus felt the familiar sting of prejudice, but years of experience had taught him to keep his voice steady. "Your mother helped us when no one else would. We're grateful, and I've been working hard to what?" Thomas sneered. "To earn your keep? Like some kind of medieval servant?" A small voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Stop being mean to my daddy." Marcus's heart sank as Alyssa stepped into view, her math worksheet still clutched in one hand, her other hand balled into a tight fist. Thomas's lip curled. "And you," he pointed at Alyssa, "you'll never belong here. This isn't some fairy tale where you get to play princess in a mansion. You're just part of my mother's latest charitable impulse." Tears welled up in Alyssa's eyes, but she stood her ground, chin raised, just like her father had taught her. Eleanor moved to stand between Thomas and Alyssa. "You've gone too far," she said, her voice ice cold. "These people are my guests. Not for long." Thomas waved the papers. "Either you end this now, or I'll make sure every judge in the state sees evidence of your declining mental state. Every questionable decision, every penny spent on these people. How do you think that will look to the charity board?" Marcus watched as Eleanor's face crumpled slightly. He knew that look, the same one he'd worn when facing impossible choices. His chest felt tight as he realized what he had to do. "Eleanor," he said softly, "may I speak with you privately?" They stepped into her study, leaving Thomas glaring at the closed door. Marcus could hear Alyssa's quiet sniffles from the kitchen, and it broke his heart. "I can't let you lose everything because of us," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "Your son, he's serious about this." "Marcus, no." Eleanor reached for his hand. We can fight this. I have other lawyers, better lawyers. And drag your name through the mud? Let him destroy everything you've built? Marcus shook his head. You've done more for us than anyone ever has. But I won't be the reason you lose your legacy, your reputation, everything you've worked for. But where will you go? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Marcus forced a smile. We've survived before. We'll survive again. When they returned to the foyer, Thomas stood smugly by the front door. Marcus walked past him without a word and found Alyssa in the kitchen, still clutching her math worksheet. Pack your things, baby girl, he said gently. We need to go. But Daddy, Alyssa's lower lip trembled. This is our home now, Eleanor said so. Marcus knelt down to her level, wiping away her tears with his thumb. Sometimes, we have to do hard things to protect the people we care about. Remember how you said Eleanor is like a grandmother to you? Alyssa nodded. Well, sometimes we have to leave to keep the people we love safe, even when it hurts. Behind them, Eleanor made a small, broken sound. Thomas watched the scene with cold satisfaction, the legal papers still crushed in his grip. Marcus stood, his decision weighing heavy on his shoulders, but his head held high. He learned long ago that dignity was sometimes all a man had left. We'll be gone within the hour, he said, not looking at Thomas. Thank you for everything, Eleanor, everything. The old grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its deep chimes echoing through the quiet mansion. Marcus moved like a shadow in the guest room, methodically folding clothes and placing them in their worn duffel bag. His movements were careful, practiced. He'd packed in the dark many times before. Moonlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the plush carpet that still felt foreign under his feet. He paused at Alyssa's dresser, gently gathering her few precious belongings. Each stuffed animal and carefully drawn picture represented a moment of happiness he wished he could preserve forever. His fingers brushed against the new sketchbook Eleanor had given her just last week, and his throat tightened. A small voice broke the silence. Daddy? Marcus turned to find Alyssa sitting up in bed, her stuffed bear clutched tightly to her chest. The moonlight caught the tears already forming in her eyes. Go back to sleep, baby girl, he whispered, but his hands didn't stop packing. You're making us leave, aren't you? Her voice trembled. She slipped out of bed, her pink pajamas rumpled from sleep. Please don't. I don't want to go. Marcus set down the shirt he was folding and knelt before his daughter. Sometimes, baby, we have to do hard things to protect the people we love. But Miss Eleanor loves us. Alyssa's lower lip quivered. She gave us a home. She reads me stories and teaches me about her flowers. I know, sweetheart. Marcus pulled her close, feeling her small body shake with silent sobs. And that's exactly why we have to go. Her son Thomas, he could take everything away from her. All because of us. That's not fair. Alyssa's voice rose slightly, and Marcus quickly shushed her. Life isn't always fair, baby girl. But we're strong, remember? We've got each other. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. And sometimes being strong means knowing when to step away. Alyssa clutched her bear tighter. But where will we go? Marcus's heart clenched. He had some money saved from the odd jobs he'd done around the estate, but not much. We'll figure it out. We always do. I don't want to sleep in the car again. Alyssa's words were barely a whisper, but they hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stood and resumed packing, trying to hide the pain in his expression. It won't be forever. I promise I'll find us another place. Please, Daddy. Alyssa grabbed his arm, her small fingers digging into his sleeve. Miss Eleanor needs us too. She was so lonely before. Remember how she never smiled? Now she laughs all the time. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, remembering the transformation he'd witnessed in Eleanor over the past weeks. The stern, isolated woman had slowly bloomed like one of her beloved roses, showing colors and warmth he suspected even she had forgotten she possessed. Miss Eleanor has her own family, baby. We can't come between that. But we're her family too, Alyssa insisted, her voice cracking with emotion. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. The door opened slowly, and Eleanor stood there in her silk robe, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. Her face was drawn with concern as she took in the scene. The half-packed bag, Alyssa's tears, Marcus's guilty expression. "What are you doing?" Eleanor's voice was quiet but firm. Marcus straightened his shoulders. "What needs to be done, Miss Whitfield? We can't let Thomas destroy everything you've built. And you think leaving in the middle of the night is the answer?" Eleanor stepped into the room, her normally perfect posture showing signs of fatigue. "After everything we've been through? Thomas will ruin you," Marcus said, his voice rough. "Take away your foundation, your ability to help others. I won't be responsible for that." Eleanor moved closer, placing a gentle hand on Alyssa's shoulder. "Marcus Johnson, do you think so little of me, that I would let my son's threats dictate who I choose to care about? This isn't about pride, Miss Whitfield. It's about protecting what you've spent your life building." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "This is exactly about pride, yours and Thomas's, and fear." She looked down at Alyssa, who had pressed herself against Eleanor's side. "What we've built here, the three of us, it's worth fighting for. Please don't go, Daddy," Alyssa pleaded again, her voice muffled against Eleanor's robe. Eleanor reached out and touched Marcus's arm, her eyes glistening in the moonlight. "Stay, Marcus. Let me handle Thomas. Some things are worth risking everything for." Marcus stood there, torn between his instinct to protect and the undeniable pull of belonging they'd found in this unlikely home. The clock chimed again, marking another hour in this night of choices. The guest house stood quiet in the moonlight, its newly painted walls gleaming softly. Marcus knelt beside the small bed where Alyssa finally slept, exhausted from crying. His work-worn hands were clasped tightly, his head bowed in prayer. The room still smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, a scent that now felt like a cruel reminder of hopes about to be dashed. "Lord," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the heating system Eleanor had insisted on installing. "I don't know what to do anymore. Every time I think I'm doing right by my baby girl, something comes along to show me different." He glanced at Alyssa's peaceful face, her cheeks still damp from tears. The moonlight caught the silver chain around her neck, a birthday gift from Eleanor just last week. His chest tightened. "You gave me this child to protect," he continued, his fingers gripping each other until his knuckles turned white. "But maybe staying here is selfish. Maybe I'm putting my wants ahead of what's right." His voice cracked. "I can't be the reason Eleanor loses everything she's worked for. I've seen how much good she does with her foundation, how many families she helps." Rising slowly, Marcus walked to the window. The main house loomed in the distance, most windows dark except for one, Eleanor's study. The sight of that lonely light made his heart ache. "But Lord, leaving feels wrong too. Alyssa's finally flourishing here. She's got her own room, her art supplies, a garden to play in." He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. "And Eleanor, she's changed so much. Sometimes I catch her humming in the kitchen or laughing at Alyssa's jokes. She needs us too, doesn't she?" Pride and fear wrestled in his chest. The memory of Thomas's sneering face made his jaw clench. "I've walked away from worse situations," he muttered. "Kept my head high, started over. But this time," he trailed off, watching his breath fog the window. Meanwhile, in the main house, Eleanor sat in her leather armchair, facing the imposing portrait of her late husband Charles. His stern face looked down at her, painted in oils that caught the warm light from her desk lamp. "What would you say about all this, Charles?" she asked softly, swirling a glass of untouched brandy. "You always knew exactly what to do in difficult situations," she smiled sadly. "Though I suspect you'd be just as shocked as Thomas at my recent decisions." The portrait maintained its dignified silence. Eleanor set down her glass and stood, moving closer to study the familiar features of her husband's face. "But you never saw Marcus with Alyssa. The way he works so hard, how gentle he is with her, how he insists on earning his keep, even though I've told him it's unnecessary." She touched the frame lightly. "And Alyssa, oh, Charles, she reminds me so much of Thomas when he was small, before." Eleanor's voice caught. before I let my grief over losing you drive him away, before I buried myself in work and foundations and forgot how to be a mother. Walking to her desk, Eleanor picked up a legal document, Thomas's threat to have her declared mentally unfit. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. Our son thinks I've lost my mind, choosing to help them. Maybe he's right. Maybe it's crazy to risk everything I've built. She sank back into her chair, feeling the weight of years of careful reputation building pressing down on her shoulders. The Charity Foundation's board members' whispers echoed in her mind. Eleanor's getting soft. She's letting emotions cloud her judgment. Think of the scandal. But when I see Marcus reading to Alyssa on the porch, or teaching her to tend the vegetable garden, Eleanor's voice strengthened. I see what family should be, what I lost with Thomas, what I've been too afraid to reach for again. Back in the guest house, Marcus had moved to sit on the edge of Alyssa's bed. His hand gently smoothed her hair as she slept. Every time I think about leaving, he prayed, I remember that night in the car. How small her voice was when she said we'd sleep there. How I promised myself I'd never let her down again. His eyes fell on the small desk where Alyssa did her homework, covered in drawings of flowers, careful copies of Eleanor's garden. A new determination began to settle in his chest, replacing the churning uncertainty. In her study, Eleanor stood again, this time moving to the window. She could see the soft light still burning in the guest house. The sight sparked something in her, a clarity she hadn't felt in years. I've spent too long hiding behind charity boards and careful propriety, she said firmly to Charles's portrait. Too long letting fear of judgment dictate my choices. Marcus and Alyssa aren't just some charity case. They're the family I choose, the family I want to fight for. She picked up Thomas's threatening document and held it over her wastebasket. After a moment's hesitation, she let it fall. Marcus touched the silver cross hanging around his own neck, a gift from his late mother. I've been running so long, he whispered, always taking the safe path, the quiet path, but maybe sometimes doing right means standing your ground. He looked down at Alyssa, peaceful in sleep, and felt strength flowing into his weary spirit. We're not going anywhere, he said softly but firmly. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. The night deepened around both houses, and two souls found their resolve. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, ready to face whatever challenges her son might bring. In the guest house, Marcus finally moved from Alyssa's bedside to his own room, his steps sure and steady. The mahogany-paneled boardroom of the Whitfield Foundation hummed with tension. Eleanor sat at the head of the long table, her silver hair perfectly styled, her posture rigid as steel. Around her, 12 board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, avoiding eye contact. Thomas strode in 5 minutes late, his expensive suit crisp and threatening. A thick folder tucked under his arm, he took his seat directly opposite his mother. The morning light streaming through tall windows caught his cold smile. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Thomas began, his voice smooth as polished marble. I've called this emergency meeting because I believe we face a crisis of leadership. Eleanor's hands clasped tightly in her lap, but her face remained calm. She'd expected this attack, had prepared herself for it, yet the pain of her own son's betrayal still cut deep. My mother, Thomas continued, opening his folder with deliberate slowness, has always been known for her generous nature, but recent events suggest her judgment has become severely compromised. He pulled out several documents, sliding them across the table to each board member. As you can see, she's housing a man with a questionable employment history. A man who, coincidentally, landed in her life at precisely the right moment to take advantage of her well-known charitable impulses. That's enough, Thomas, Eleanor said quietly, but he spoke over her. This Marcus Johnson, Thomas practically spat the name, has managed to convince my mother to gift him housing on her private estate. He's wormed his way into her confidence, using his daughter as emotional leverage. And now, he pulled out more papers. Now he's living rent-free, contributing nothing while my mother renovates an entire guest house for his personal use. The board members murmured, reviewing the documents. Mrs. Peterson, who'd served on the board for 20 years, frowned deeply. Eleanor, dear, is this true? Eleanor straightened in her chair. What's true is that I chose to help a hard-working father and his innocent child who had fallen on difficult times. Difficult times of his own making, Thomas interrupted. Did you know about his previous eviction? Or the fact that he lost his last job due to factory-wide layoffs that affected hundreds of workers? Eleanor cut in, her voice sharp. Something you'd know if you'd bothered to check the full story instead of cherry-picking facts to suit your narrative. Thomas's face reddened. The point is, Mother, that you're being manipulated. This man, Eleanor said, rising slowly to her feet, gets up every morning at dawn to maintain my grounds. He fixes things I didn't even know were broken. He takes pride in honest work. Thomas, something you might not recognize. Oh, please, Thomas scoffed. He's playing you like a fiddle, and that little girl, don't you dare. Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare speak about Alyssa. The board members watched, transfixed, as mother and son faced off across the table. Thomas's smile turned cruel. Why not, Mother? Does it hurt to hear the truth? That you're trying to replace me with some stranger's child? Eleanor's hands gripped the edge of the table. Is that what this is about? Your jealousy of an 8-year-old girl who's shown me more genuine love in a few weeks than you have in years? Love? Thomas laughed harshly. You think they love you? They love your money, your big house, your influence. They're users, Mother, and you're too blind to see it. No, Thomas. Eleanor's voice softened with sadness. You're the one who can't see. You can't see that Marcus would rather sleep in his car than take advantage of anyone. You can't see that Alyssa's smile when she brings me flowers from the garden is pure and real. You can't see that sometimes family isn't about blood at all. She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. Yes, I helped them. Yes, I gave them a home. And yes, I've grown to love them. Not as charity cases, not as some replacement family, but as the genuine, hard-working, kind people they are. Thomas stood now too, his face twisted with anger. This is exactly why you need to be removed from power. You're emotional, irrational. I am more clear-headed now than I've been in years, Eleanor declared, her voice ringing through the room. Marcus and Alyssa aren't some project or charity case. They're my family in every way that matters. Not by blood, no, but by something far stronger. By choice, by love, by faith in each other. The silence that followed was deafening. Board members glanced at each other, then back at Eleanor, who stood tall and unwavering. Her words hung in the air, a testament to conviction that no legal threats could shake. Mrs. Peterson was the first to speak. I've known you for 20 years, Eleanor. I've never seen you more certain of anything. She turned to Thomas, her expression stern. And I've never seen you more wrong about something, young man. One by one, other board members began nodding. Mr. Chen, the quietest member, spoke up. The Whitfield Foundation was built on helping people in need, on recognizing human dignity. If Eleanor sees something special in this family, I trust her judgment. Thomas's face had gone from red to white. You're all being fooled. No, Thomas, Eleanor said firmly. The only fool here is the man who thinks love and compassion make someone weak. Marcus and Alyssa are my family now. Not because I needed a replacement son or because they tricked me, but because sometimes God puts people in our paths for a reason, and I thank Him every day for bringing them into my life. The mahogany-paneled boardroom felt suffocating as Marcus sat quietly in the back, watching Thomas pace before the charity board members like a prosecutor making his case. Eleanor sat rigid in her chair at the head of the table, her fingers gripping the armrests. My mother has always been generous, Thomas said, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. But this time, her charitable impulses have crossed a line. This man, he jabbed a finger toward Marcus, has taken advantage of her kindness. He's nothing but a burden on her resources. Several board members nodded in agreement, their expensive suits and pearl necklaces gleaming under the chandelier light. One elderly woman clicked her tongue and whispered something to her neighbor, who covered her mouth to hide a smirk. Marcus felt the familiar weight of judgment pressing down on his shoulders. He'd felt it countless times before in job interviews, at store counters, walking down streets in wealthy neighborhoods. But this time was different. This time, it wasn't just about him. He thought of Alyssa's face lighting up when she tended the garden with Eleanor. He remembered the warmth in Eleanor's eyes when she watched his daughter play. The way both their lives had been transformed by simple kindness and understanding. Something deep inside Marcus shifted. He rose slowly from his chair, his work-worn hands steady at his sides. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. "I'd like to say something, if I may." Thomas scoffed. "This isn't a public forum." "Let him speak," Eleanor interrupted, her voice sharp as steel. Marcus took a deep breath, looking each board member in the eye. "I know what you see when you look at me. A black man down on his luck. Someone who's taking advantage of a wealthy woman's generosity, a burden." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But let me tell you what I see when I look in the mirror every morning. I see a father who's worked every honest job he could find since he was 16. A man who's never asked for handouts, who's always believed that faith and hard work would see him through." His voice grew stronger, filled with quiet dignity. "When I lost my job at the factory, it wasn't because I was lazy or irresponsible. It was because the whole plant shut down. When we got evicted, it wasn't because I was careless with money. It was because sometimes life hits you harder than you can handle alone." A few board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus continued, "Mrs. Whitfield didn't just offer us shelter that night. She offered us dignity, hope, a chance to prove that we're more than what people assume when they see us." He turned to face Thomas directly. "Since staying at the estate, I've fixed 3 broken shutters, repaired the greenhouse roof, maintained the grounds, and helped reorganize the storage rooms. Not because anyone made me, but because that's who I am. That's what my daddy taught me. You contribute where you can. You show gratitude through actions, not just words." Tears welled in Marcus's eyes, but his voice remained steady. "My little girl, Alyssa, she used to cry herself to sleep in our car, asking why God had forgotten us. Now she prays every night, thanking him for sending us an angel in Mrs. Whitfield. She's learning that kindness exists in this world, that people can see past the color of your skin and the money in your pocket." He spread his hands open. "I'm not asking for your approval or understanding. I'm just asking you to see us, really see us as human beings trying our best to live with dignity and grace through hard times." The silence in the room grew thick. One of the younger board members dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "My mother's wealth isn't just about money," Marcus concluded softly. "It's about the richness of her heart. And if that makes me a burden, then I'll carry that label with pride, knowing that sometimes the heaviest burdens lead to the greatest blessings." The room remained completely still. Several board members who had been sneering earlier now looked down at their hands, unable to meet Marcus's steady gaze. An older gentleman in the corner slowly nodded, his expression thoughtful and moved. Thomas stood frozen, his face flushing red with anger and embarrassment. Without a word, he snatched his briefcase from the table and stormed toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. The door slammed behind him with a bang that made several people jump. The sound hung in the air like the final note of a symphony, leaving behind a transformed atmosphere in the boardroom, one where truth had spoken louder than prejudice and dignity had triumphed over disdain. Every face in the room showed the impact of Marcus's words. Some looked ashamed, others appeared deeply moved, but all had been touched by the raw honesty and quiet strength of his speech. The sneers and whispers had been replaced by respectful silence and contemplation. In that moment, the room held the weight of change, the kind that happens not through grand gestures or legal threats, but through the simple power of one man's truth spoken from the heart. The boardroom settled into an uncomfortable silence after Thomas's dramatic exit. Eleanor sat straight-backed in her chair, her hands folded neatly on the polished mahogany table. Marcus stood nearby, his heart still pounding from the speech he'd just delivered. Mrs. Peterson, a silver-haired board member, cleared her throat. "Well," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, "I must say, Mr. Johnson has given us quite a lot to think about. Indeed, said Mr. Richardson, adjusting his glasses. I've been on this board for 20 years, and I've never heard such honest words in this room. Eleanor's face brightened as several other board members nodded in agreement. The tension in the room began to dissolve, replaced by something warmer, more hopeful. Actually, said Mrs. Peterson, straightening some papers in front of her, I believe we have an opening in our community outreach department. We've been looking for someone to manage our local initiatives. Marcus blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes sparkling. That's right, Mr. Richardson chimed in. Someone who understands struggle firsthand. Someone who can connect with the people we're trying to help. He looked directly at Marcus. Would you be interested in such a position, Mr. Johnson? Marcus's throat tightened. I would be honored, he managed to say, but I don't have the fancy education that— You have something better, Eleanor interrupted gently. You have experience, real experience. The board members murmured in agreement. Mrs. Peterson pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. The position comes with a full benefits package, she said. Health insurance, retirement plan, the works, and the salary. She named a figure that made Marcus's knees weak. I don't know what to say, Marcus whispered. Say yes, Eleanor said softly. Marcus looked around the room at the encouraging faces, so different from the cold stares he'd encountered in town. Yes, he said firmly. Yes, I accept. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Alyssa bounced around their guest house kitchen, barely touching her breakfast. I can't wait to see my new school, she chirped, adjusting her backpack straps for the 100th time. Marcus smiled, remembering how Eleanor had pulled strings to get Alyssa into Riverside Elementary, one of the best schools in the district. Remember what we talked about, baby girl? Alyssa nodded solemnly. Be myself, be kind, and do my best. That's right. Marcus straightened her collar. And remember, I'll be picking you up right after work. After your new job, Alyssa corrected him, beaming. Your important job helping people. A knock at the door revealed Eleanor, dressed elegantly as always, but with a softer expression these days. Ready for the big day? She asked. Ready. Alyssa ran to hug her. Over the past weeks, Eleanor had become like a grandmother to her, and the change in both of them was remarkable. They drove to the school together, Eleanor's chauffeur navigating the morning traffic with practiced ease. As they pulled up to the school's entrance, Marcus saw other parents dropping off their children. Some glanced curiously at the fancy car, but there were friendly waves too. Look, Daddy, Alyssa pointed at a group of children playing on the playground. Can I go say hi? Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with pride as he watched his daughter confidently approach her potential new friends. A little girl with pigtails waved, and soon Alyssa was deep in conversation. She's a natural, Eleanor observed, standing beside him. Just like her mama was, Marcus said softly. He rarely spoke of Alyssa's mother, but in this moment of joy, the memory brought warmth instead of pain. The school bell rang, and children began filing inside. Alyssa ran back to give Marcus and Eleanor quick hugs before joining the line. They watched as she fell into step beside the girl with pigtails, chatting animatedly. Just before entering the building, Alyssa turned and waved one last time. Marcus caught a snippet of her conversation with her new friend. We don't sleep in the car anymore. We have a real home now, with a garden and everything. Marcus felt Eleanor's hand squeeze his shoulder gently. She's going to be just fine, Eleanor said, and Marcus knew she was right. Looking at his daughter's retreating figure, he silently thanked God for bringing them to this moment, for the strange and wonderful path that had led them here. For the first time in years, Marcus felt truly hopeful about the future. He had a meaningful job, a stable home, and most importantly, his daughter was safe and happy. As he watched Alyssa disappear into her classroom, he knew that sometimes the biggest blessings came disguised as the darkest storms. The autumn breeze rustled through the curtains of Alyssa's new bedroom in the guest house. The walls, freshly painted in soft lavender, Alyssa's choice, glowed warmly in the light of her bedside lamp. Her drawings were already taped up everywhere, spreading color and life across the space that had so quickly become their home. Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing his work clothes from his new position at Eleanor's foundation. The tie was loosened around his neck, but his smile was bright and genuine. The past few weeks had brought changes he'd never dared to dream of: a real home, meaningful work, and most importantly, the joy radiating from his daughter's face. "Time for bed, baby girl," Marcus said softly, pulling up her favorite quilt, another gift from Eleanor, to her chin. Alyssa's stuffed bear, now accompanied by several new plush friends, sat arranged carefully on her pillow. "Daddy," Alyssa said, her eyes bright even through her sleepiness, "Miss Carlton said I got the highest score on my math test today." She beamed with pride, and Marcus felt his heart swell. The new school had been good for her, the teachers supportive, the other kids welcoming. "That's my girl," Marcus praised, smoothing back her hair. "I knew you could do it. You've always been so smart." He paused, taking in the sight of his daughter in this beautiful room, safe and warm. The memory of those nights in the car seemed like a distant nightmare now. Alyssa's expression grew thoughtful. "Remember when we used to pray in the car, Daddy? When it was raining really hard?" Marcus nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. "I remember, baby. And now look at us," she said, gesturing around her room. "We have a real home." "And Miss Eleanor," she smiled sleepily. "She's like having a grandma, isn't she?" Marcus glanced toward the doorway, where he knew Eleanor often lingered during these bedtime moments. "She's become family, hasn't she?" he agreed softly. "God works in mysterious ways, bringing people together." Alyssa yawned, snuggling deeper into her covers. "Tell me again, Daddy. Tell me how we got here," Marcus chuckled. It had become their new bedtime ritual, recounting their journey from despair to hope. "Well, we were having a really tough time," he began, his voice gentle. "Things looked pretty dark. But even in our hardest moment, God was watching over us. He sent us an angel named Eleanor Whitfield. In a fancy car," Alyssa added sleepily, making Marcus smile. "That's right, in a fancy car. And even though some people didn't understand, even though some people tried to stop it, Eleanor opened her heart to us. She showed us that family isn't just about blood, it's about love and faith and believing in each other." Alyssa's eyes were growing heavy, but she fought to stay awake. "And now you help other people too, right, Daddy? Through the foundation?" Marcus nodded, thinking of his new role. Every day, he worked to identify families in need, to create programs that could lift people up the way Eleanor had lifted them. "That's right, baby girl, because when someone shows you kindness, you pass it on. That's how love grows." "Like Miss Eleanor's roses," Alyssa murmured, her eyes finally closing. Marcus leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Exactly like that. See, baby girl?" he whispered, tucking the quilt more securely around her shoulders. "God always makes a way." In the soft lamplight, Marcus could see the peaceful smile on his daughter's face as she drifted off to sleep. The room around them was filled with evidence of their new life: school books on the desk, new clothes in the closet, and most importantly, a sense of security that had been missing for so long. From her place in the doorway, Eleanor watched the scene unfold, her heart full to bursting. Tears glistened in her eyes as she observed the tender moment between father and daughter. The past weeks had transformed her life as much as theirs, filling her empty house with laughter and purpose. She thought about Thomas, about his anger and prejudice, and felt a deep sadness, not for herself anymore, but for what he was missing. He couldn't see the miracle that had unfolded here, the way love had created something stronger than blood ties. Eleanor wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself, emotion catching in her throat as she watched Marcus tenderly adjust Alyssa's blanket one last time. In all her years of wealth and privilege, she had never felt as rich as she did now, watching over this small family that had somehow become her own. "And sometimes," Eleanor whispered to herself, her voice barely audible, "family is the miracle we choose." What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Marcus Johnson, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.